It's a good day to brew, baby. What is up, YouTube? It's your boy Millsy, back at Hometown Commander. I'm back for another episode of Millsy Brews, the show where I brew my version 1.0 deck list of the Commander in front of us on my quest to outbrew the Magic world. Today we're finishing up week 1 of our Gravedigger Remastered celebration, where we're going through for each guild and making a commander deck based around one of the cards printed in a Gravedigger set or set on a Gravedigger set of a legendary creature of that guild. Today we're talking about Dimir, finishing up for the eagle-eyed viewers the kind of, Guilds of Gravedigger set of guilds. That's how I chose to do it. The Dimir is an interesting choice because I think in a lot of ways you get very interesting different decks. You do have some of the older Dimir creatures. We do have a Trotta, we do have Lazav, and I thought Lazav would be the most fun because I've never really made a deck like Lazav. I've made decks where you're trying to get things into graveyards with things like Captain Nagathrod and things like that, but I've never really made a deck where you're trying to mill yourself and take advantage of that, which I think is an interesting idea. But we're playing Lazav the Multifarious, a 2-mana 1/3 shapeshifter. This is when it enters the battlefield, we surveil 1. So when you're surveil, you're going to look at the top card of your library. You can put it back on top or put it into your graveyard. And it says for X mana, we can become a copy of target creature card in our graveyard with mana value X, except its name's Lazav, it's legendary, and has this ability. So Lazav is going to try to copy creatures in our graveyard. We are playing the other Lazav Dimir Mastermind, which we can use to make copies of other people's creatures. So that would be our first big decision: is do we want to copy ours or do we want to copy our opponents? I decided to try to copy ours, and we'll talk about how I'm going to try to do that. But we do have a couple creatures that can copy creatures from our opponents' graveyards, so we're going to still try to take advantage of that as well. We're just mainly going to be trying to do our own graveyard. So to talk about how we want the deck to work, I'm going to talk about how we're going to try to get cards into our graveyard, and then we're going to talk about the creatures that we hopefully want to get in our graveyard so that we can copy them, because again, at the end of the day, that's what's important. So we'll talk about that in a second. Let's talk about how we're going to get cards into our own graveyard. Well, there's a couple ways we could do that. We have things like Entomb and Unmarked Grave, which can go get specific things and put it into our graveyard. That's pretty great if we're looking for a particular creature for a set situation. But we also have fun things like Dark Deal, Whispering Madness, and Windfall that are just going to have everyone pitch their hands and draw new hands, which can seed the cards are into the hand, into the graveyard, cards in our hand into the graveyard, and some other fodder for some of our other creatures to copy in anyone and get us fresh cards into our hand. We have things like Will, the Forgotten, which we can look at the top 3, put one in our hand and the rest into our graveyard, which will allow us to do it that way. A kind of roundabout way to do it, although it's going to also do us a lot of good, is like Breach the Multiverse, where everybody mills 10 and we get creatures back from everybody's graveyard. But again, it's another way to seed cards into our graveyard. We have things like Frantic Search, which can allow us to draw and pitch cards. Consider, another surveil card. Things like Tainted Indulgence, draw 2 and pitch 1. Unless there's far more mana values in your graveyard. But again, earlier in the game, we want to be pitching those cards, getting them into our graveyard. And things like Glimpse the Unthinkable, which we can either mill ourselves for 10 or mill someone else for 10 in the process. The other thing that I realized pretty quickly as well is that we can take advantage of the Descent mechanic from Lost Caverns of Ixalan because it cares about getting things into your graveyard. So we have things like the Overflowing Well. When it comes in, we mill 2 and draw 2. And then if we have 8 or more, it flips into the backside, which allows us to turn permanents into other things whenever we cast things. The Enigma Jewel taps for 2 mana, and that's going to help us pay for Lazav. Matzalanti, the Great Door, is kind of interesting because once we craft it, or once we activate it, by having 4 more different types, it turns into a land that taps for X mana of any one color, where X is the number of permanent types in our graveyard. And since we're trying to seed our own graveyard anyway, that's something that's going to come in big handy for us. We have something like Scion of Halaster, which says the first time we would draw a card each turn, instead look at the top 2, one in our hand, one in the graveyard, one in the back on top. We have things like Search for Azcanta every turn, where we can hopefully seed some cards into our graveyard. And then a fun choice that a lot of people probably are going to think about is something like Dakmor Salvage with Dredge, where instead of drawing We can put 2 cards on the top of our library and put Dakmor back into our hand. And we could always pitch it with a spell effect to put it back into our graveyard and, kind of always be helping seed our card that way. Takanuma has an activated ability where we can mill some cards into our library and get something back. So as you can see, we have a bunch of ways to kind of seed things into our graveyard or start pitching things into our graveyard with things like Rona, which is a discard and draw. But again, the point is we have a couple cards that are going to allow us to basically throw things into our graveyard, hopefully, and start building this hopefully amount of creatures that we can then use to copy with Lazav. Now, I'm going to talk about the creatures really quickly that we could copy with Lazav, but I want to first talk about a couple of the other creatures in our deck that can copy creatures. We have Dimir Doppelganger, 3 mana to exile target creature card from a graveyard, and it becomes a copy of it, so that can hit our opponents too. Likeness Looter becomes a copy of a target creature card in your graveyard of mana value X, except it has flying in this ability and it doesn't exile that thing. So Likeness Looter is kind of just like Lazav, except it has flying, which is pretty cool as well. I thought we had one more. We have Lazav. I think those are the big 3 that copy something. But let's start talking about the things we want to copy. Consuming Aberration. Its power and toughness equal to the number of cards in your opponent's graveyards. So not only do we have things like Windfall on those cards, we're also playing like Mind Crank, for example, to help seed more cards into our opponent's cards. So it becomes a star, where that's the number of cards in our opponent's graveyard. So Lazav could get pretty big. And whenever we cast a spell, each opponent reveals tires from the top until they hit a land and puts those cards in their graveyard. So that's going to help seed more cards into their graveyard. Cruel Somnophage, equal to the number of creature cards in all graveyards. Again, going to get pretty big and hopefully something we can take advantage of. Eater of Days says when it comes into the play, we skip our next 2 turns. But the cool part about copying it from our graveyard is it never ETBs. So it's just a 9/8 with flying and trample that we just need to discard in our graveyard and have some fun with. We have a Leveler. Whenever it enters the battlefield, exile all cards from your library. Well, again, we're just going to discard it and copy it of our graveyard, and that's a 10/10. Mordivore, power and toughness equal to the number of creature cards in all graveyards. Necrotic Ooze, activated abilities with all creature cards in all graveyards, so not a bad idea to copy and get a bunch of abilities. Night Howler, enchanting. It has plus X, or it gets XX, where X is the number of creature cards in all graveyards. Phage the Untouchable. Of course, if it enters the battlefield, if we didn't cast it from our hand, we lose the game. But it's okay again because we're just we're turning something into a copy of it, so it doesn't ETB. Whenever it deals combat damage to a creature, destroy that creature, and whenever it deals combat damage to a player, that player loses the game. So there's a big threat. Souls of the Lost. Power and toughness equal to the number of permanent cards in our graveyard. Toughness just +1, so kind of a Tarmogoyf style effect. We have the Ancient One, which takes advantage of that Descent, getting into being an 8/8 big boy. And then Toxrill just seemed like too fun not to put in, a way to hopefully start affecting our opponent's boards. It potentially could just be a house on its own. Now, all of these creatures I just talked about are great targets for Lazav. We also could just play them outright, of course, besides the ones that really hurt us when we play them. The other ones we could just play. We could just spend 4, 5, 6 mana and have a big creature out that's going to start hurting our opponents. We don't have to throw them in the graveyard and copy them, but I like that we get the options to do that. Or we can just have them out and generate value with them. So I kind of like the idea of having that option. Throw it in the graveyard and copy it, or play it ourselves. We're also playing 1 battle Invasion of Amonkhet, mainly because on the backside. But the front side says when it ETBs, each player mills 3, and then each opponent discards a card and we draw a card. But the backside says we can have Lazatep Convert come in as a copy of any creature card in a graveyard except it's a 4/4 zombie. So again, here's another way to have something come in as a copy of one of these big creatures in our graveyard. We're playing Jace and Lab Maniac, so that if we would draw a card while our library has no cards in it, we win the game instead. Just on the off chance we manage to mill ourselves out, I don't want to run into a scenario where we end up losing the game. And in fact, Jace Wielder Mysteries -8 does allow us to draw 7, and if our library has no cards in it, we win the game. So if we're able to get Jace, enough, if we manage to get enough cards in our graveyard, Jace could potentially, win us the game that way, which is helpful. But as you can see, a lot of the deck is big cards that go into the graveyard, or cards that can get us cards into our graveyard. Auric Mage goes get a card of our choice and puts it in our graveyard, and then shuffles, so that can start seeding some of these big creatures in there. And as you can see, it just kind of sets up this, hopefully protect our graveyard, get things in there, and take advantage of it. Well, let's get into our playtest Keeping a 3-lander here. The Lazav is only 2 mana, which is pretty great. But we need to start getting things into our graveyard. Turn 1, we see we have this Leveler in our hand. We definitely don't want to play it. We want to make sure we discard it somehow. Night Howler for 3 mana, or we can get into our graveyard. We do have an Entomb, which is a pretty cool card. It means we could seed something really fun for Lazav into our graveyard. But I think we just throw this Fetid Pools in. Entomb's a great card, but I don't think we have yet to see anything we really like that we want to do. Takenuma is a great ability, which is great. Well, they can start getting us things. We'll put in that command tower. Like I said, we have the Entomb we can do. I'm just trying to think of what in the deck we'd want to seed in right now. I mean, I guess we could cast Lazav if we wanted to, or we can wait and try to just get some more things down on the battlefield. Turn 3, we draw a Breach the Multiverse, which is a pretty great card. Turn 3, we could get this Night Howler down, but again, there's nothing in our graveyard, so we certainly don't want to do that. We don't really have much to do besides the Entomb. So I'd say maybe on our opponent's turn we Entomb. And I'm just trying to think of what would be something I'd want to sit in my graveyard to get ready for Lazav to do. I don't mind something like Doom Whisperer, because we could start surveilling and getting things into our graveyard. That might not be a bad idea. Start building up our graveyard, especially since we have yet to see anything that really starts milling around things. We have the Ancient one that could eventually make it pretty big once we get to 8 cards in our graveyard. We have Necrotic Ooze. I mean, there's plenty of things we can choose from here. I would say let's go get, I guess, Doom Whisperer. Doom Whisperer would allow us to have a way to start surveilling and getting access to more things as long as Lazav copies it. All right, turn 4, we have Takenuma, which I really would have liked to have played, but that's okay. We have an Unmarked Grave, which we could seed another thing into our graveyard. So I think I would cast Lazav here. We really don't have anything good in our hand to play, and I think I would Unmarked Grave. So Unmarked Grave is going to get us something non-legendary from our library into the graveyard. Let's just give us another option of something we can copy and have ready to go for Lazav to become a copy of. Again, I really love the idea of Toxrill, but again, it has to be non-legendary. I'm trying to think of one of our other things that are like stars that become really good. But I think at the moment we just need to get creatures that we can easily cast. I kind of like the idea of Jace's Archivist, because we can then pitch our hand. We could tap it to everybody pitches their hand and draws cards, and that would get Night Howler, Manticore, and that Leveler into our library, which I like the idea of. Drowned Catacomb is going to come in untapped. It would be 3 mana to become a copy of the Jace's Archivist. The only problem is we would lose the Breach the Multiverse if we do that. But I don't really see anything else. We could also become a copy of how do I view my graveyard? We could also become a copy of that. I say we could always become a copy of Doom Whisperer and start surveilling, just trying to get some other things into our graveyard. Maybe get some getting some lands. I think I'd do that. Let's pay 5 to become a copy of Doom Whisperer. Let's pay 2 to surveil 2. We see a Swamp and a Consider, and I'm honestly at this point kind of willing to put them both back into the top. We want that Swamp so we can get closer to Breach the Multiverse. It seems like it'd be a good point to use that. And Consider, I guess we could put in our graveyard. We don't really need it, but I kind of like the land back on top. We pass with a oh, that's right, I did it here. We pass with a 4/4, a 6/6 flyer with trample, so we could have attacked that turn if we wanted to, but let's not for the purposes of this. We'll draw and get a Swamp down. Again, we could victimize. We do have creatures in our graveyard, but I don't really want to get rid of Lazav to do that. I'd say let's pay the 2 life to surveil again. Let's just see what we can find. We see Auric Lore Mage and Criminal Past. I like Criminal Past because it's +X+O, where X is the number of creature cards in our graveyard, so it is going to make our Lazav a little bit bigger. I'll put the Lore Mage in the graveyard, although it's a great card. I think we're still pushing towards this. We're still pushing towards this grief. We could always surveil again, but I kind of like the idea of just playing like one of these, one of these cards here. Maybe we just like dump this one out, and it's gonna have some. A decent, right? We have one. We have 3 creatures, so it's a 3/3 at the moment, and it's just gonna get bigger. And now we have another threat that isn't just Lazav. All right, this turn we'll draw, and I really, again, would have loved that land, but it's okay. I'm going to pay the 2 life to Surveil 2 again. We see double lands, so I'm okay with that. I kind of like the idea of Criminal Past here to bluff this up a little bit. Maybe we play the Night Howler just to get us another threat on board and completely plan to just breach the Multiverse next turn, and let that be the plan. We could also, now that we've gotten this Criminal Past out of our hand, we could make Lazav here a copy of Jace's Archivist, and then just do that to reset our hand. But again, I really want to play this Breach. So I'd say if Lazav in the air has a good attack, or this Mortivore has a good attack, maybe we take it. But otherwise, here we go. Turn 8, we just Breach. Try to get a bunch of things back from people's graveyards. We seed a bunch of new things into our graveyards. Hopefully our Night Howler and Mortivore get buffed here by the amount of things that are coming in. Now we're getting creatures back from Breach the Multiverse, and maybe we get a good scenario here where we can really push in for good damage. But let me know, what do you guys think of Lazav Gravedigger in the comment section below. Again, very interesting deck. Wasn't a little bit out of my comfort zone of something I normally brew, but I like the idea of this deck. I think it's a ton of fun, and there's some fun creatures we get to copy. But thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll catch you guys next time.